Christmas Eve, 2002. A respected educator makes one final stop before visiting her imprisoned husband. She orders a sandwich, walks to her car, and vanishes into the Louisiana night. What happens next will haunt investigators for over 20 years. But here's what makes this case truly chilling. Scattered around her abandoned car, police found something that told a horrifying story. Her purse, her keys, her uneaten sandwich, and several of her acrylic fingernails ripped clean off during what was clearly a violent struggle. This is the story of Ann Fowler, and how a serial killer took his darkest secret to the grave. Now, imagine this. You're a mother, a grandmother, a beloved educator who spent your life helping others. It's Christmas Eve, and you're making the difficult journey to visit your husband in federal prison. You stop for a simple sandwich, something millions of people do every day without a second thought. But this ordinary moment becomes the last time anyone would see you alive. This is Louisiana, 2002. The Baton Rouge area is already gripped by fear, as women are disappearing and turning up murdered. And Ann Fowler is about to become another name on a serial killer's list. Except this time, something would be different. Something that would make her case unique among all his other victims. Let me tell you about the woman who vanished on Christmas Eve, and the monster who investigators believe took her. As a former assistant superintendent with the Louisiana Department of Education, she had dedicated her life to making things better for students across the state. But 2002 had been a difficult year for Ann. Her husband, Derrick Fowler, had been the Louisiana Elections Commissioner until a bribery scandal sent him to federal prison in Texas. Can you imagine the humiliation, the whispers, the way people probably looked at her differently? But Ann wasn't the type to abandon the people she loved. Every few weeks, she would make the long drive from Baton Rouge to Texas to visit Jerry. It was a tradition she maintained despite everything, a testament to her loyalty and character. December 24th, 2002 was supposed to be just another one of these trips. Her plan was simple: drive to Lake Charles to spend the night with family, then continue to Texas the next day to spend Christmas with Jerry in prison. It wasn't going to be a typical Christmas, but for Ann, family came first. But she never made it to Lake Charles. She never made it to Texas. She never even made it out of the subway parking lot in Port Allen, Louisiana. Picture this scene. It's Christmas Eve evening, around 7 p.m. The Subway sandwich shop on LA Highway 415 in Port Allen is probably busier than usual. People grabbing quick dinners before holiday celebrations. Ann walks in, orders her usual, and the employees remember her as polite and friendly. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed off. She pays for her food, says thank you, and walks out into the parking lot. That should have been the end of a perfectly normal transaction. But the employees inside start to notice something strange. Ann's car, it's still there. 20 minutes pass. 30 minutes, the car hasn't moved. Finally, concerned employees decide to check on her. What they find in that parking lot will haunt them forever. Ann is nowhere to be found, but scattered around her car is evidence of a nightmare. Her purse, thrown on the ground. Her car keys. The sandwich she just bought, uneaten and abandoned. And then, something that makes investigators' blood run cold. Several of Ann's acrylic fingernails are broken off and scattered across the asphalt. Not just fallen off, violently ripped away. The kind of damage that only happens during a desperate fight for survival. Someone had grabbed Ann Fowler, and she had fought back with everything she had. But here's where this story gets even more terrifying. A nearby liquor store had a security camera, the only witness to what happened next. The footage is grainy, shot from a distance, partially blocked by an awning, but it captures just enough to paint a horrifying picture. A dark pickup truck pulls up next to Ann's car. A figure emerges, a man. The camera catches him grabbing Ann, and then the truck drives away, disappearing into the Christmas Eve darkness. Ann Fowler had just become the victim of what investigators would later believe was one of the most prolific serial killers in Louisiana history. Ann's son, John Pritchett, carries a burden that no parent should ever have to bear. That Christmas Eve, He had invited his mother to spend the evening with him and his children at his home in Brusley. It should have been a simple family gathering, grandchildren opening presents, sharing a meal, making memories. But Marianne declined. She was committed to visiting Jerry, committed to being there for her husband during what was probably the loneliest Christmas of his life. "I'll never forgive myself," John would later say. "If I'd tried harder to get her to come with me, maybe none of this would have happened." Think about that for a moment. A son who has to live every day knowing that one conversation, one decision, might have saved his mother's life. The weight of that guilt, it's unimaginable. That night, as John was driving home with his own family, he noticed police lights flashing on the highway. Just another Christmas Eve incident, he probably thought. He had no idea that those lights were there because of his mother. The phone call came later. A message on his answering machine asking him to come to the sheriff's office to identify a purse. When John arrived and saw not just local police, but FBI agents, he knew something terrible had happened. His mother, the educator, the devoted wife, the loving grandmother, had vanished without a trace. Now, here's where this story connects to something much larger and more terrifying. In 2002, the Baton Rouge area was living in fear. Women were disappearing. Women were being found murdered. And investigators were starting to realize they were dealing with a serial killer. His name was Derrick Todd Lee, and by the time he was caught, he would be connected to the murders of at least 7 women between 1998 and 2003. Lee had a pattern. He targeted women who were alone, often in everyday situations. Shopping centers, their homes, routine errands that should have been safe. But Marianne's case was different from Lee's other victims in one crucial way. Her body was never found. Still, the evidence pointing to Lee was compelling, even if it was circumstantial. Listen to this list and tell me it doesn't give you chills. Lee drove a maroon 1994 Chevrolet pickup truck, matching the description of the vehicle seen on that security footage. But here's the kicker. Just days after police issued a public plea for information about a truck matching that description, Lee sold his truck. Days after. His cell phone pinged a tower near Port Allen shortly before Marianne's abduction. Then, later that same night, his phone pinged again from Iberville Parish, near where another victim's body had been found. During search efforts for Marianne, investigators found a book that belonged to her in that same Iberville Parish area. A book. How does a victim's personal belonging end up miles away from where she disappeared unless someone transported it there? And Lee's alibi for Christmas Eve? He didn't have one. His wife told police that when she and their children returned home that evening, the house was empty. Lee didn't come home until after 4 a.m. on Christmas Eve. Where was he for all those hours? When investigators finally found and searched Lee's old truck, they hoped for DNA evidence, fingerprints, anything that could definitively link him to Marianne's disappearance. But the truck had been contaminated. The new owner had used it for construction work, destroying any potential evidence. It was frustrating. It was heartbreaking. And it meant that even though investigators were convinced they knew who took Ann Fowler, they couldn't prove it. For years after Derrick Todd Lee was captured and convicted for his other murders, investigators held on to hope. Sheriff Mike Kazes even visited Lee in prison with an offer that showed just how desperate they were for answers. He told Lee that if he would just reveal where Marianne's body was located, they wouldn't prosecute him for her murder. Think about that. Law enforcement was willing to give up justice for one victim if it meant giving her family the closure of knowing where she was. But Lee refused, and according to investigators, whenever Marianne's name was mentioned, Lee would become enraged. Why would the mention of one victim's name trigger such anger unless there was a connection? Marianne was declared legally dead in 2004. In 2005, her family and friends gathered for a memorial service that was packed with people whose lives she had touched. They remembered her joy, her generosity, her dedication to education and helping others. But the questions remained. Where was Marianne? What exactly happened that Christmas Eve? In January 2016, those questions became even more haunting. Derrick Todd Lee died of heart disease while on death row, taking his secrets with him to the grave. Whatever he knew about Mary Ann Fowler's fate died with him. Colonel Richie Johnson, one of the lead investigators on the case, remains convinced to this day that Lee was responsible. But conviction and proof are two different things. Today, more than 20 years later, the case remains open. Investigators believe that someday, maybe through land development, rising water levels, or even a hunter in the woods, Mari Ann's remains might be discovered. Technology improves every year. Cold cases get solved decades later when new evidence emerges or when someone finally decides to speak up. John Pritchett, now in his 50s, still carries the pain of that Christmas Eve every single day. He still wonders, what if? He still hopes for answers. Mari Ann Fowler was a teacher, a public servant, a mother, and a grandmother who dedicated her life to helping others. She deserves to be brought home. Her family deserves answers, and sometimes all it takes is one person watching a video like this to make that happen. Thank you for watching and for taking the time to learn about Mari Ann's story. If this video touched you, please give it a thumbs up and share it. You never know who might see it and have information that could help. Subscribe if you want to see more stories like this, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any uploads. I'll see you in the next video, and remember, every missing person is someone's loved one. Every case matters. Until next time, stay safe out there.